Hey, welcome back to Let's Get Your Shift Together. I haven't put out a video in a while, so it's time, and I am pretty much going to talk about the different personality types of people who get Tension Myositis Syndrome. I'm going to also stop calling it childhood trauma because I don't think that resonates with many people because just the whole word trauma is one of those words that makes people immediately resistant to this type of work, which is what I have found. So I'm gonna call them childhood experiences. And basically, as I talk about these personality types, I am sure that you can think of childhood experiences, not necessarily trauma, are what caused you to be how you are today as an adult, and why you have chronic pain. So I'm gonna hopefully make more sense out of it for you guys. And if there's like any questions or anything that anyone feels that I need to be more specific about, just comment or message me or whatever. I'm willing to dive deeper into certain topics. I've kind of had this whole TMS stuff ingrained into my brain for the past like several months because I've just been researching the crap out of it after I figured it out. And I mean, it's kind of interesting to grasp at first, so I totally get if none of this resonates with anybody watching this. I would imagine if you are watching this, some of it at least does resonate with you, so at least I'm kind of explaining something right, so yay. So I'm just gonna dive right into these personalities. So the first one is perfectionist. So are you a perfectionist? When you do something, does it have to be done perfectly? And it doesn't necessarily have to be over everything. It could be certain things that you're a perfectionist about. So I am a perfectionist about certain things, and like, for example, my makeup has to be perfect or I'm not leaving. And why am I like that? I was bullied in elementary school. So that's a childhood experience that caused me to be a perfectionist. And I mean, other reasons too. This is just like very brief. I'm not gonna get too much into my life, but I'm sure you could probably think of examples if you're a perfectionist on why you are a perfectionist. Did your parents demand perfection for certain things? Were you enrolled in, I don't know, piano or ballet or like gymnastics or any kind of extracurricular activity that required you to perform to a certain ability in order to continue on? Like, I mean, I was in gymnastics back in the day and I know that I had to like pass certain things. So is that why I'm also a perfectionist? Maybe. Is that why you're a perfectionist? Maybe. Any other childhood experiences you could potentially think about that are why you're a perfectionist could be also why you have chronic pain. So it's kind of like a fear response. So for example, if I learned to be a perfectionist in my childhood, which is where it happened. This is where we learn all of our personality traits. It's in childhood, whether we want to like that theory or not. That's just what it is. Your past kind of shapes who you are today. That's just how life kind of works. So if I like to think of chronic pain as something that's fueled by fear, whether we grasp and understand it or not. So I'm going to use the gymnastics example. If I wanted to go from like level 1 to level 2, I needed to perform to a certain standard as a child. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not bashing like extracurricular activities whatsoever. Just this is what it is. Like, this is how kids learn to be perfectionists or whatever. And if I didn't make it to that next level, what did that mean? Well, my parents probably would be upset with me. They would have to spend the money again for me to redo the level I was just in, and it would upset them, and maybe I'm afraid of upsetting them. So I hope that made sense. And that fear of upsetting your parents is kind of what would cause you to be a perfectionist. My makeup example, that fear of getting bullied made me start wearing makeup and kind of taking care of my skin and whatnot. And I mean, I'm glad that I do take care of myself because maybe I wouldn't otherwise. I mean, for me, I enjoy putting on makeup, looking half decent when I leave the house. But it's not like a life and death situation. And I mean, I'm sure I would have been completely fine not doing that every day if I hadn't been made fun of for my appearance in elementary school. So that being said, perfectionist is one of them. The next trait is, are you sensitive? So it could be sensitivity over certain things. There's some people who are sensitive about one thing, whereas another thing they wouldn't be sensitive about whatsoever. I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head for an example of sensitivity. Like, kids are generally, in my opinion, I think they're pretty sensitive about anything. They don't really understand how the world works, so if they, I guess, got made fun of for something, they might be sensitive about it throughout their lives, and that's just what they learned, and that's just the neural connection that was made there. Whereas something else, they might not be sensitive about it, but their peers would be super sensitive about it. So are you sensitive about anything? Probably. I think we all are to some extent. The next one would be ambitious. So being ambitious, why are you ambitious? You learned it as a kid. And why are we ambitious? Because we want to do better. Why do we want to do better? Fear. We're afraid that if we don't do better, we're going to be stuck where we are, and it just kind of all fuels itself as fear. The sensitive part, which I didn't really link it to fear, I'm going to do that right now. I'm just jumping all over the place here. Why are people sensitive about things? Fear, right? I mean, if something didn't bother you, then it's not something you're necessarily afraid of. And I mean, fear is a spectrum too. So you could be like mildly afraid of something and unconsciously afraid of something, where like you don't really get why you're having this fear response and you're going into fight or flight mode. But it's basically fear. The next personality trait is anxious. So anyone who has anxiety, you learned that in childhood, pretty much, right? So why are you anxious? Did something happen in your childhood that made you anxious? And it could be something like, it could literally be anything. Like, it could have been, you're in school, your teacher pretty much, I don't know, threatened something that like, oh, if you don't finish this assignment, you're not gonna have recess for a week. That could plant the seed of anxiety in a child. They take that throughout their lives. So it's, you know, you're like fearing the consequence of an action or inaction. And that it's rooted in fear. The next one is people pleaser. So that's absolutely rooted in fear, because if you were not a people pleaser, you would have never had an experience where someone would be angry with you for doing or not doing something, and this all kind of ties into anxiety and being a perfectionist and whatnot. So that's why at the beginning I kind of said these all kind of are the same thing. The next one is hardworking. I mean, it's good to be hardworking, but are you killing yourself over being hardworking? So are you working like 12-hour days when you really only need to work an 8-hour day, just to kind of prove a point that you're like valuable to a company or whatever, right? That's rooted in fear, and that's learned in childhood. So, I mean, again, could be your parents, could be your teachers, could be your peers. It's some sort of fear response to something you did or didn't do that caused you to be hardworking. And again, that ties in with the perfectionism, ties in with anxiety, ties in with even being sensitive and ambitious. The next one is hyper responsible. So as a kid, were you responsible for something that you didn't necessarily need to be responsible for? So did you have a younger sibling perhaps where, you know, your parents had you watch them for a certain amount of time because you're older and you needed to be responsible for it? Again, it's well-meaning. I'm not bashing parents, I'm not bashing anyone. It just is what it is. But is that where you learned to be hyper responsible? Did you have a relative that was sick and you had to kind of help a parent with that responsibility? Or even in school, like, were you like a big brother or big sister or whatever to like the younger kids and you were responsible for that? Not that it's a bad thing, but that could manifest itself as a psychological loop in your brain that you need to be hyper responsible for like everything, or just things that you don't really need to be that responsible for. So like, do you put a lot onto yourself that you're feeling that you have like this hyper responsibility for? Where did you learn that? In your childhood experience. Not necessarily a bad thing, not necessarily trauma, but the brain kind of perceives it as a sort of trauma. But again, I'm gonna try not to use that word because I don't think people can relate to it that well. And then the last one is conscientious. So basically, are you like hyper aware of how other people feel and like perceive things that you do and whatnot? And why is that? Childhood experience. Because why would you think to be that way if it never happened in your childhood? So I mean, I've had completely different experiences in childhood than other people. And the way that other people think about certain things, I could never even imagine thinking about it that way because that was not my experience. For example, I was an only child. I don't understand people with siblings at all. Like, I don't get it. The way I see it is like my husband, for example, he has a brother and they share everything, and it's like, okay, so you don't have this thing that you need because your brother has it, and it's like, just take accountability for your stuff. And I've never had that experience, so my wiring's completely different than his wiring. And I mean, he probably thinks that I'm over responsible for things because I mean, I kind of had to be because I didn't have a sibling or anything. So it's like, I have all the things that I need, and not that I have a problem with sharing, but I don't really have anyone that I need to share anything with. So it just doesn't make sense to him how my brain functions, doesn't make sense to me how his brain functions. But that's what makes being human fun, I guess, right? No two people are the same, otherwise like that would be pretty boring. So I hope that was a helpful kind of crash course in the personalities of TMS. If any of these resonated with you and you do have chronic pain, you probably have TMS. Just saying. I see, like, I'm in a few TMS support groups, and there's a lot of people who ask like, oh, do I have TMS? I have this personality trait, that personality trait, and it could be like a sub-trait of whatever I just mentioned. Yeah, that's part of it. So anything that kind of relates to what I said is probably part of TMS. If you're watching this video, you probably have TMS. That's what chronic pain is. It's just this loop that you've created in your brain fueled by fear. And it's a fight or flight response that your brain is used to being in because it doesn't want to think of the emotions. So these personality traits are connected to the emotions, because how did you feel in that moment as a child when you had to figure out that you had to be a perfectionist or sensitive or anxious or whatever? Obviously there was an emotion there that you suppressed, and then that personality trait kind of took over because of that suppressed emotion. So it's usually fear or anger that's suppressed, and then there's like all these categories of fear and anger, but those are the root emotions that get suppressed and manifest themselves into certain personality traits, and then you get chronic pain or chronic conditions. And this is basically, understanding this to begin with is your first steps towards healing. I'll have more videos obviously in the future, but I hope this, I'll keep it short and sweet as much as I can, and I hope this was helpful. And again, any questions, just leave a comment or just ask. Talk to you guys later.